Yeah, welcome. I'm your MC for today, WW2. I thank you very much for coming here and celebrating or commemorating the 75th anniversary of the withdrawal of Canadians from Italy. The fighting for Italy started in Sicily on the 10th of July, 1943, and ended on the 25th of Feb, 1945. The Canadian participation in Italy was 20 months long. By comparison, the Canadian participation in the liberation of Northwest Europe was 11 months. Two veterans here today that were veterans of the Italian campaign, and then they went on to Europe, is Charlie Muse from Tuscan. He was Princess Louise Fusiliers, fought in Italy with the Irish Regiment of Canada, and Miff O'Connell from Little River Harbor, which fought with the Royal Canadian Dragoons. Now, brings us to our guest speaker. Today, our guest speaker is going to be George Egan from Yarmouth. He was a school teacher, and not too sure if they founded it, but it's a Wartime Heritage Society of Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. So he's been involved in that, getting some history on the local soldiers that went to war. He has information on the cenotaph, a wealth of knowledge if you want to pick his brain. But anyway, here today he's going to give us a talk on the Italian campaign. George?
42 ships carrying Canadian soldiers departed Great Britain on June 25th, 1943. On board were the 1st Canadian Infantry Division and the 1st Canadian Army Tank Brigade. They didn't know where they were going, and it was not until July 3rd, as they passed through the Straits of Gibraltar, that they learned that they would be part of the invasion of Sicily. On June 28th, the second convoy group that included 10 ships transporting Canadians departed Great Britain. In the two convoys, Canadians numbered some 26,000 troops with tanks, artillery, and supplies. Two additional convoys would bring supplies and troops, all part of a total invasion force of some 3,000 ships and landing craft. But the convoy of June 25th lost 3 ships from enemy attack, and 52 Canadians drowned, including 6 from Nova Scotia. A significant amount of equipment was also lost, including vehicles, artillery, signal equipment, and the Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps lost personnel and medical supplies. The Allied invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky, was a major campaign of World War II. As the first step, on July the 10th, the American 5th Army and the British 8th Army, that included the Canadians, landed in Sicily. Flotillas of Royal Canadian Navy landing craft supported the troops. 3 Canadian bomber squadrons operating from bases in Tunisia to support the troops. And Spitfires of the RCAF flew aircraft from the first to the last of the campaign. The battle lasted 38 days. Canadians came ashore carrying 70 or 80 pounds of equipment, fought in hot, dusty weather, battling through difficult terrain. They were sunburned through their shirts, but the medical teams did devise a sunscreen, iodine and olive oil, and it worked. Sicily was the first real test in World War II of what the Canadian Army could accomplish. They fought through 210 kilometers of the mountainous country, further than any other formation in the 8th British Army. Andre Boudreau of Wedgeport served with the Nova Scotia Regiment, West Nova Scotia Regiment. He was 24 when he enlisted in January of 1940. On August 2nd, 43, he was killed in action. He is one of 3 born in Yarmouth County, buried in a World War II cemetery in Sicily. With the enemy driven out of Sicily, the Allies invaded mainland Italy. Elements of the 8th Army, including the Canadians, landed in the toe of Italy on September the 3rd of 43. The enemy forces were determined to hold the Italian mainland and took advantage of the mountainous landscape, turning the length of the Italian peninsula into a whole series of defensive positions protected with machine guns, barbed wire, landmines, and artillery positions. The 5th Canadian Armored Division arrived from Great Britain in November, and the Canadians, with other Allied troops, battled up the Italian mainland, successfully pushing back the enemy in villages, towns, and cities. James Vandenberg, age 18 of Tuscott, John Harris, age 24 of Camoes Hill, Malcolm Britton, age 23 of Forest Glen, Freeman Grant, 17 of Carleton, and Emile Joseph Comeau of Beaver River were 5 from Yarmouth County, killed in action as the Canadians fought towards Ortona in December of 43. At Ortona, its narrow, rubble-filled streets limited the use of tanks and artillery, and the Canadians engaged in vicious street fighting. The town was liberated on December the 28th after more than a week of battle. During April and May of 44, the Canadians moved across Italy to join the Americans in the struggle for Rome. On May 22nd, John Emmert Doucette with the 48th Highlanders of Canada, and on May 24th, Philip Joseph Blanchard with the West Nova Scotia Regiment were killed in action. 2 soldiers from Quinnen buried in the Casino War Cemetery. May 23rd, the worst day in terms of casualties for the Canadian Army in Italy, saw 890 Canadians killed or wounded. Among the dead would be Arnold Clayton White of Carleton and James Muse of Yarmouth. The 8th Army continued up the Liri Valley towards Rome against fierce resistance. The capture of Soprano on May 27th broke the German resistance, and Rome fell on June 4th. But Canadians did not march triumphantly into the city. They were placed in reserve several days before, and the American forces entered Rome. As one Canadian veteran put it, "We did all the hard fighting, and the Americans marched into the city as liberators." The fall of Rome and the D-Day landings in France 2 days later made Italy seem so much less important. But the fighting went on, and the Canadians played a leading role in the breaking of the Gothic line, crossing the peninsula north of Florence throughout August and September. August 31st saw the death of Trooper Joseph Walter DeVoe, serving with the 5th Armored Brigade. On November the 1st, Henry James Muse from Sluice Point, serving with the Cape Breton Highlanders, was killed in action. After spending November in reserve, the Canadians returned to attack Ravenna, and the city fell on December the 4th. And on that day, James Theodore Doucette of Wedgeport, fighting with the Princess Louise Fusiliers, was killed in action. Pervin O'Neill, age 24 of Deerfield, was killed on December the 10th. Many remember the mud, the rain, the cold in winter, and the endless shelling. Henry O'Connell served as the nose machine gunner in a 15-ton armored car, and later in an open American White Scout car, armored reconnaissance. Seek out the enemy, withdraw so the infantry could go in. He didn't want to be in the infantry. But in the fall of 1944, their vehicles got stuck in the mud. So after a few days, he was moved to the front line to assist the infantry to hold the lines. He arrived at 10 a.m. It was October the 11th. At 1 p.m., he was hit by shrapnel. He was hospitalized until just before Christmas. Again, he was wounded on January the 11th of 1945. His closest call from the enemy guns came when a shell hit a few feet from his armored car. He survived, the 2nd machine gunner did not. Charlie Hughes served with the Irish Regiment of Canada in Italy. He can tell us about the terror of those enemy 88 shells. He and Simon Mallet found themselves the target of one. When the dust settled, all one could see was Charlie's helmet. He had been buried in chunks of earth, once dug out of the mud, and he confirmed he was intact although just a little shaken, he was hospitalized for a time before returning to the battle. Veterans can tell you stories of not sleeping in beds for months, of climbing narrow mud roads, freezing in the winter months because their winter gear didn't arrive until December of '43, of crossing endless rivers and valleys, repairing and building endless bridges, of eating canned bacon, mostly fatty, and bully beef day after day after day, but thankful for it nevertheless, of seeing hungry children, sharing food with them, of a Christmas day at Ortona when the fighting continued and soldiers died, and saddest of all, of seeing friends wounded and killed. The campaign continued into the spring of 1945. In February, the 1st Canadian Corps began the move to Northwest Europe to be united with the 1st Canadian Army. There they would join in the drive into Holland and Germany. Now, it was after D-Day that the Allied servicemen who fought in Italy during the Second World War were sometimes referred to as D-Day Dodgers. An American-born British politician, Nancy Astor, first used the ill-considered term that implied cowardice and avoidance of the real war in France. The troops who had been fighting there for 9 months felt slighted by her ignorance and resented the implication of the phrase D-Day Dodgers. The result was words to a song many servicemen in Italy began to sing, set to the tune of Lily Marlene. The words generally and sarcastically refers to how easy the soldier's life was on the Italian front. We landed in Salerno, a holiday with pay. The Jerrys brought the bands out to greet us on our way, showed us the sights and gave us tea. We all sang songs, the beer was free. But it is the last verse that tells the real story. Look around the mountains, in the mud and rain, see the scattered crosses, some which have no name. Heartbreak and toil, suffering gone, the boys beneath them slumber on. They are the D-Day Dodgers who'll stay in Italy. The purpose for the Italian campaign was to remove Italian troops from other areas of Europe, divert German forces from France, and reduce the strength of the German army. These goals were achieved. In Sicily and in Italy, Canadians demonstrated that they were superior soldiers. 92,757 Canadian soldiers served in the campaign. 19,486 were wounded. 5,764 lost their lives. 30, born in various communities of Yarmouth County, never returned. Today, we remember them, and we remember the veterans who served in the Italian campaign.